Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into what is arguably the most secretive, highly anticipated cinematic event of 2026, Christopher Nolan's massive adaptation of Homer's ancient Greek epic, The Odyssey. Coming right off his incredible Oscar sweep, Nolan deciding to tackle the ancient world is just absolutely fascinating. We're going to break down the facts, the controversies, and the sheer unfiltered logistical madness it actually takes to bring the Bronze Age to life on IMAX.
Now, what's really interesting to start with is this staggering number, $250 million. That's the estimated net budget for this film, officially making it the single most expensive project of Nolan's entire career. Coming hot off the phenomenal success of Oppenheimer, Universal Pictures basically just gave him a blank check. They set this movie up directly rather than making him fight through a bidding war, and as you'll see, every single penny of that budget is right there in the final product.
So we have a ton of incredible production trivia to get through, and to keep it all straight, we've structured this explainer into 5 neat parts: Nolan's next epic, a star-studded Greek myth, realism in a mythic world, a mammoth global production, and finally, scoring the Bronze Age. Let's jump in.
Part 1. Nolan's next epic, a 20-year journey.
It's kind of wild to think about, but this concept has been gestating in Nolan's mind for decades. Actually, he passed on directing the movie Troy 20 years ago because he felt he just wasn't qualified yet. But getting to this official announcement, that was a hilarious journey all on its own. Nolan is notorious for keeping his scripts totally under wraps, and that intense secrecy bred some absolutely wild rumors. Before Universal finally confirmed it was The Odyssey, people seriously thought he was making a vampire period piece, or even crazier, a reboot of the 1983 helicopter action movie Blue Thunder. Nolan actually joked later that the one downside of keeping everything a secret is these crazy rumors, though he admitted he kind of loved reading them.
Okay, let's dive into part 2, a star-studded Greek myth.
Unsurprisingly, Universal assembled an absolute powerhouse A-list cast to bring these legendary figures to life. You've got Matt Damon leading the charge as the brilliant but super complicated tactician Odysseus, right alongside Tom Holland as his son Telemachus and Anne Hathaway playing Queen Penelope. Zendaya steps into the divine role of Athena, and then there's Robert Pattinson taking on Antinous, who is Penelope's chief suitor. What's fun about Pattinson is he was the only actor who actually demanded to read the script before signing on. He described his own take on the character as incredibly sleazy, even comparing the vibe to James Woods' mobster character in the movie Casino.
But the real extreme physical dedication, that came from Matt Damon. To truly embody a king who has basically been ravaged by years of war and being lost at sea, Damon dropped all the way down to 167 pounds. He maintained this ultra-strict gluten-free diet because he wanted a look that was, in his words, lean but strong. He also grew out a massive, real beard for an entire year. Why? Because Nolan outright refused to use artificial facial hair. He insisted on capturing the genuine, tactile physicality of real hair on IMAX film. No cutting corners.
Which brings us to part 3, realism in a mythic world. So how exactly do you ground a story that is literally packed with monsters, witches, and angry deities? Well, Nolan did it by completely throwing out the standard visual language of Greek mythology. Instead of your typical Hollywood CGI gods hurling lightning bolts from the clouds, Nolan embraced this concept he calls tactile realism. He figured out it's far more terrifying and immersive to portray the raw human fear of natural phenomena. To the people living in the Bronze Age, freak storms, shifting weather, and brutal nature weren't just weather events, they were the literal active wrath of the gods. Reframing the supernatural like this was a massive creative breakthrough for the script.
And he applied that exact same tactile realism to the practical effects. Take the fearsome Cyclops, Polyphemus. That is not just a digital creature. They built him using a crazy mix of animatronics and puppetry, physically performed on set by Bill Irwin. The design itself was actually inspired by Francisco Goya's terrifying painting, Saturn Devouring His Son. For the sea voyages, they literally sailed the largest modern Viking longship around the Mediterranean to double as a Greek warship. And the armor? It was painstakingly crafted from real, expensive, period-accurate materials like black and bronze, silver, and sulfur, just to properly convey the wealth of kings like Agamemnon.
But interestingly, this intense focus on practical design sparked some pretty heavy scrutiny early on. When the very first promotional image of Matt Damon dropped, historians were quick to criticize his red-plumed Corinthian helmet. They pointed out it was totally historically inaccurate for the actual era of the Trojan War.
Film critics, however, immediately noted that Nolan was deliberately paying homage to the old Hollywood epics of his childhood, choosing a distinctly recognizable cinematic style over strict archaeological rules. It's a fascinating debate, really. When you are adapting a myth, does historical accuracy matter more than iconic storytelling?
Let's move to part 4 and see how this all builds. A mammoth global production.
Capturing this level of practical magic required one of the most grueling logistical feats in modern cinema. 2 million feet. That is nearly 610 kilometers of 70mm IMAX film used to shoot this movie. This is the very first feature film in history to be shot entirely on IMAX film cameras. But that created a huge problem, because IMAX cameras are notoriously incredibly loud. To capture intimate, audible dialogue, the crew literally had to construct massive, specialized soundproof blimps to mute the camera noise. They even had to rely on complex mirror systems just so the actors could maintain eye contact with each other around these gigantic, loud machines.
And the timeline of this shoot perfectly illustrates the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the production. It really mirrored Odysseus' own epic journey. Over 91 days, the crew relentlessly globetrotted. They kicked off in Morocco to film the ruins of Troy. Then they moved to the actual beaches of Greece for the Cyclops scenes. They sailed a real ship around the Aeolian Islands in Italy, trekked all the way to the black sand beaches of Iceland to represent the underworld of Hades, hit the forests of Scotland, and finally wrapped up back on a soundstage in Los Angeles. Nolan wanted his cast and crew to experience the physical toll of venturing into the unknown, and he certainly put them through the elements to get it on film.
Now, a global shoot of this magnitude didn't happen without some intense real-world political friction, specifically regarding the scenes filmed at the White Dune near Dakhla in Western Sahara. Critics, which included the UN-recognized Polisario Front and international film activists, strongly decried the production filming in the territory. They stated that the shoot whitewashed Moroccan colonialism and actively demanded the scenes be removed. On the other side of the issue, the Moroccan Cinematographic Center strongly defended the production, hailing the arrival of a massive blockbuster as a vital, highly positive boost for the local film industry.
Let's shift gears to part 5, scoring the Bronze Age.
So, how do you even begin to score a story that is nearly 3,000 years old? Composer Ludwig Göransson, teaming up with Nolan yet again, took an incredibly bold approach here, an absolute ban on traditional orchestras. He did not want this sounding like your typical sword and sandal gladiator movie. Instead, Göransson leaned heavily on modern synthesizers, blended seamlessly with actual bronze gongs to really reflect that Bronze Age setting. They went as far as hiring musicians to build fully functional replicas of ancient Greek lyres and a reed instrument called an aulos. They literally had to study ancient urns just to figure out how to reconstruct them, since the original reeds don't even exist anymore.
And in what has to be one of the most surprising choices of the entire production, rapper Travis Scott makes a cameo appearance as a singing bard. Why? Well, Nolan wanted to draw a direct, fascinating parallel between the ancient Greek tradition of oral poetry — remember, the Odyssey was originally sung and chanted, not read — and modern-day hip-hop. He analogized the rhythmic, foundational storytelling of ancient bards directly to rapping, and even had Scott contribute vocals to the film's unconventional score.
Which perfectly brings us to the core thesis of this entire endeavor. As Nolan himself put it, when you start to break down the text, you find that all of these other films and all the films I've worked on, they're all from the Odyssey. It's foundational. He literally views this ancient text as a secret blueprint behind every thriller, mystery, and blockbuster he has ever directed. The Odyssey isn't just an old story, it is the absolute bedrock of modern narrative structure.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to chew on. By stripping away the standard CGI, utilizing massive practical effects, and treating the wrath of the gods as terrifying natural realism, Nolan has completely reinvented how we view our absolute oldest story. So, what you should really take away from this explainer is that Hollywood's future might actually lie in its deepest past. And it begs the question, if all modern storytelling stems from the Odyssey, what ancient foundational myth are we going to see reinvented next? Thanks so much for learning with us, and we'll catch you on the next explainer.